town has lots of committees, commissions, and ad hoc groups that do things around the town that help the town out, and Whitman is no stranger to that. And we're going to take a look at one of those today, the Historic Commission. We'll find out kind of what they do, what they're doing here in Town Hall on a Saturday, and what kind of things that they want to be doing in the future. So let's take a little run upstairs and talk to the Historic Commission. Up here on the second floor, there is an office labeled Historic Commission, and standing right next to me here is Molly Schnabel, who happens to be the chair of the Historic Commission. Molly, what is the Historic Commission do?
The Historic Commission is actually a governmental body in the town, and we do research on the history of the town. We make indications of what is important to the town. We preserve the records of the town. Basically, that's it. We aren't a society, we're a commission, so we're governed by the open meeting law and by the selectmen, and we have appointees as well. We're appointed as a board. And then we defer back to the selectmen, and if we're removing anything, then, which is what happened this past week, we talk to the selectmen before we do that. But we're in the business of preserving the history of the town, particularly the written part, like the town reports, the listings of where people lived, the homes. Right now, we have CPA money that's coming in for doing surveys of our houses. We have 16 districts within the town that previous surveys have indicated should be with the National Trust, which is a really big history of the country. And this town is particularly busy because of the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, the oaks up on Beach Hill, the water rights that come in the grants, things like that. We really do the history of what was there, what needs to be preserved, what we don't want to have go away. Now, if it was an object, we would prefer to see that go to the society. Like, I always use Aunt Hattie's hat. We preserve Aunt Hattie's will, we might preserve Aunt Hattie's records of her house, but we don't keep her hat. So that's the difference of it. But we are definitely a governmental body, and we have to report back to we're under the Secretary of State. So all of us have to pass that test. So
just to make things a little simpler for folks, you don't preserve the records, you preserve the provenance. Sort of?
Sort of, yeah. We do preserve a lot of the records. Yeah. But, you know,
I mean, relics is what I was saying, not records.
Oh, yeah, not the relics, yeah, no. Yeah, the provenance we would keep, yes, but not the object.
Now, maybe it's a good time to actually kind of maybe define provenance for folks.
Mm-hmm. It's the history. So let's say, I'll give an example of something that I did. I had a glass plate, and I wanted to know about the glass plate because my mother had given it to me, and she said, you know, it's like Brigadoon. Once every 100 years, the label comes up, and you know, mark it down and get to your computer, and I did. And I took it to the Corning Museum. And when I went to the Corning Museum, they said, we cannot document this because we're a museum. However, we have 5 people who can document this for you, and they shoot light through the glass and everything else. But she was most interested in, where did I get it? That's the provenance. So I told her where I thought I got it. And she said, I don't think so. So she was like what we would be. She had the history of that type of glass. She was a specialist in that. So she went into the records, and we were able to figure it out. And we sent it to Webster, New York, and they verified it, and it's now in the Corning Museum. So they will preserve it, and they will use it as a teaching item because you don't see it. It's a specific type of cut glass. So that's the same type of thing we did. If you brought Aunt Hattie's hat to us, we would look and say, well, here's Hattie Webster. You know, maybe she owned the hat. We would give you that, but then you have to figure out what you're going to do with the hat because we're not taking it.
Talk about, and people, you know, have heard of the term history detectives, but that's basically what historians are. They are right. Detectives exactly. Tracing the trail of something that right. exists.
That's exactly right. And that's the fun of history. is where you see something like when you see this town hall, when you come into it, and then you look at the records. And one of the ways I got involved with the Historic Commission was I was on the Historic Commission in Rockland, and they asked me to do some research on Beach Hill. And they knew that there had been a big brick foundry there, and they wanted to know the name of the brick foundry. So I went all the way back, and I worked with a woman who was a specialist in doing research on real estate, and I could read Old English. She couldn't. So the two of us together made a team, and we were able to give them enough information that they had all the information that they needed to keep that as an open space property instead of it being a bunch of townhouses. So it was slated for 35 townhouses, but when we were done, there was enough history in that piece of property that it was maintained for the town as open space, which was a much better idea for it because that's what it had been originally.
So let people know that you're no stranger to the history of Old Abington, which Whitman is part of.
No. Back, in the dark ages, there was a selectman in Rockland named Bill Burke, and it was in the beginning of when the state first started having historic commissions. And he called 7 people that he felt he knew from various and sundry things that he thought would make a good historic commission. So he called us, and we agreed to go on, and we've remained friends, and we still do a lot of history research, talk a lot of history, drive people crazy because we get into it. But we were under the tutorship of Marcia Fader, who's works for the Parks Department, and I don't know that she still does. She lives on Nantucket now, but she was a preservation architect and was prone to moving mansions, presidential mansions, lighthouses, things like that. So we did a survey of the houses most frequently being threatened for being taken down. We saved the Alms House, and then we saved approximately 30 houses into a district. And then we went for a state grant, and we did the 100 oldest houses in town, and then we went for the next 100 oldest houses in town. And it's held up. And what started us on it was that the Alms House was slated to be torn down, and it still stands. And all of the North River Collaborative is housed there, and all the buses are there. There are 2 soccer fields and 1 baseball field. So the town is still using that property, and that's where your history comes in. If you can save it to keep it within the ranks of what you want to do with your history, then it works out really well.
Okay, now we've got an idea as to what the Historic Commission does. Now we can get a little bit more specific, and I'll ask you what you're all doing here today.
We didn't have anything to do because it was rain. We have an office that's very small in space, and one of the things that we identified recently, because we're moving towards a survey, Michael Ganchard isn't here, but he should be here shortly. He's running an errand for us because we need different types of files. They did a survey of quite a bit of Whitman, and it was beautifully done, really nicely done. But in that process, as we're moving on to the next group of buildings to try to make sure that we have the history of them, whether they go or they don't go, we found that if you were looking for, and I'm going to use the Baptist Church because I used that the other day, if you were looking for information about the Baptist Church and you came to us, we would say, well, here's this piece here, and then here's this piece here, and then, well, wait a minute, we've got this over here. So what we're doing is we've taken apart the file cabinets, and these are all different piles that mark out so that we're trying to get everything in an order so that if you came to us, or let's say a developer was coming to town and wanted to take away something that we felt shouldn't be taken away, we could easily get that information immediately to the selectmen or to whichever board they were going in front of, because that's what we do. We work with the boards within the town. We provide that information to them.
Because that history can be important. It really,
Very.
Every now and then there's something that you really have to find out about.
Well, interestingly enough, as I said, I've remained very friendly with the people who I was on the commission with in Rockland. And I called all of them because I wanted to know about 113 Temple Street and had they ever heard the history of 113 Temple Street. And oddly enough, what brought me to Whitman was my son lives here, and he was living in 113 Temple Street. And he said, well, can you find out something about this building for me? I said, no, I can't. No. So I'm going through learning things when I came on the commission here, and it turns out it's the home of, sometimes he's captain, sometimes he's colonel, but his name is Allen. And he was the man who took when the Civil War started, all the states had to have militia. And if you want to really understand how they had the militia, you could go back to Illinois and how Grant came to Lincoln's attention. It was because Governor Yates had Grant as his head of his militia. And he said to Lincoln, you might want to look at this guy. And that's how it came forward. So we had a militia here, and Allen was the head of the militia. And he had understood that there was things going on, and he felt that his men should be ready. So when they fired on Fort Sumter, he notified his men immediately. They went to the train station. They took the train into Boston, and when they got to Boston, they went to the Common, and there were so many people there at the Common, he was smart enough to say to his men, we're mustering down to Faneuil Hall, which is where they were supposed to go to once they formed. But he took them in already formed. So your first soldiers in the Union Army were from Whitman.
And there is a very nice marker out on Washington Street listing that event and all the people that were mustered out from here.
Right. Yet there's nothing on the house where my son lived, and that's where he lived. So, that's part of that house should be, I found in different files here, I found all kinds of articles about this happened at that house or that happened at that house, but they're not all in one house, which you've brought us right back to where we're trying to go today. So, I don't know, a lot of times too, when you look at the buildings, like if you look at where Colonel Allen lived, there's a stone wall in front of it. And I bet you that if we go back to some of the maps that we use, we're going to find that there was a barn there, that stone wall was actually a foundation. And a lot of times the big stone walls that you see on side streets where streets go down, like perfect example is Crescent Street in Rockland. There's a huge stone wall that goes right down from the corner down. And if you look across the street, you'll see the barn. They moved across the street so that they could take Crescent down. And they did that basically so that they could get there's always a reason for it, and that's part of the fun of history is why did they do that? And it's they moved houses so that you could get the people into the factories. It's where was the factory and how many people can go in there and do metal detectors to find stuff, and they do. So it's happening all over the United States. So we can give them information like that to help. Does that help?
Yeah. Okay. Now, I'm going to switch gears a little bit again because you mentioned earlier about being before the selectmen about removing some things from what you have up here. Right. And I just wanted to get you to talk a little bit about what you said to the selectmen the other night, because some of that is important stuff for various reasons of longevity of records and things like that. Right.
So one of your biggest enemies in historic research or preservation is mold, mildew, water stains. Let's use how many people go into genealogy is so big today, and so many people have trouble trying to find the information about their loved ones in the Second World War. And they go to the archives in St. Louis, and they'll say, can you tell me where, Colonel Allen was? And they might have it, and they might not. Not necessarily because it has mold or mildew, but because there was a fire there. And they've had 3 fires there. And it wasn't the fire that destroyed the records, it was the water, because they had sprinkler systems, and the sprinkler systems came in and they destroyed them. So when I'm looking at pieces of paper, I look to see if there's mold, mildew. Mold particularly will hop from one thing to another. And if you've ever lived in an area where they have flash floods, you become painfully aware of it, because if you're away when it happens or they have you go to a shelter, by the time you come back, if it's humid like today, you can have mold and mildew, and then you can have an allergic reaction to it and it can jump. So we have pieces in there that are not indigenous to Whitman. They have both mold, mildew, and water stains. all three things, and we find that those are more harmful. Now, there are other things that we've identified that are like Aunt Hattie's hat that we would prefer to see be boxed and go to John Campbell's collection, because he's trying to get a museum going, and hopefully he will. And those are pieces that should be in his collection. And that way, then we have the space that we need to do the research that we need if, say, a building department or the selectmen or a school department comes to us and they're looking for information, then we can do the research for them.
And mold and mildew, I finally got it out, can actually be very destructive to paper. And, you know, if the cross-contamination happens to a clean document, then that document starts to deteriorate.
Right.
And about the only thing that kills mold and mildew is bleach.
Right.
And you don't want to get bleach in the paper because that destroys that too.
No, and you're right. But one of the things that's very interesting is when you're doing preservation, and with the area of computers, people love to digitize all of their pictures and then they throw them away. I would recommend they not. And particularly old pictures, because the ink is quite different. New pictures, it fades. And also your computers change on a regular basis. You know, I think back to, you know, years ago when my kids were in school, you know, we were learning how to use floppy disks. And probably Sean over there has never seen a floppy disk. But people were doing that. They were putting things on those, but then you can't get to them. So it's better to go into a genealogy website or to find different places that you can keep your original copies, because the ink is so good and so well maintained. And they're doing that a lot. And certainly that's one of the things we're doing here, is we're trying to keep the paperwork that has really solid ink in it instead of copies. You know, if it's a copy off of, let's say, Ancestry or Find a Grave. You have people that are changing that on a regular basis. And the people who put it on themselves are constantly having to go back to monitor it. So you don't always get the true history of it. So that's what we're doing here, is we're trying to make sure that we have everything in the right order.
Okay, thanks, Molly.
Did you want to see some of those things?
You were just reading my mind. Yeah, because I want to see, you know, something like that, so we can show people what to look for in records they have or artifacts that they have, that you don't want necessarily to be getting close to something else.
Yeah.
So we're going to take a brief pause and come back with some little goodies to show you. Well, we're now here in the little mouse hole that you call your office, and we're looking here at a picture of a famous president that people might not recognize because his face looks a little different in this shot.
Mm-hmm, it does. And the reason is he's clean shaven. And there's a whole story behind this, and one of the things that people will tell you is that the clean shaven pictures of Abraham Lincoln are more valuable than the ones. So the story behind the clean-shaven pictures of Abraham Lincoln are, when the abolitionists wanted him to become the president, they knew that all the pictures before him, he didn't look directly into the camera. He looked off to the side. You could see pockmarks on his face. His hair was always a mess. Sometimes he was dressed in work clothes, sometimes he wasn't. So Matthew Brady was an extremely well-known photographer and also one of the abolitionists. So he stepped forward and said, "Let me do something for you." So he took a picture of Abraham Lincoln, and they had an article about it. There's a photography show on Channel 2 now, and they had it on, I think, about a month ago. And it actually explained the picture, and it explained Matthew Brady's work with it. And it showed him full face forward, which is he's looking into the camera, and his hair is combed, and he's wearing a suit that's now at Brooks Brothers, because it was a Brooks Brothers suit, so they now have it in Washington, D.C. And you see the full extent of him, because he was 6'4". and he has his hand on a Bible, and he's looking directly in. And it was definitely a political picture, and it's considered the first real political picture that was taken. And he was certainly photographed a lot. So this was in schools, but the problem is we have one that's in better condition, and it's already been spoken for and it'll stay here in Whitman, which is what we would like to see have happen. But if you look down in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see the green mold right there.
Okay, we just follow my hand down here, and you can see it right down in here.
Yeah.
And there's other indications. I don't know whether that's aging or watermarks or whatever.
It's both. This picture is unfortunate, but I don't know where it was. I don't know how it got here. Kind of wish it hadn't. But people think that this is the famous one, but actually the famous one is the full body, where he's standing 100%, and he's looking directly into the camera. This one, he's still got his head slightly tilted. The other one, he's you're looking at a full-fronted person. And it was a photographer that's running the show. I keep thinking it was Mo Rocca, but it wasn't. It's a photographer, and he explained all of Matthew Brady's, and certainly Matthew Brady's work in Massachusetts is extremely well known. I don't think he was from Massachusetts, but Drew Faust, when she was the president of Harvard, did a lot of work with Matthew Brady's pictures and did quite a few books on it. So, but I think this is just a copy. It's a paper cardboard, but you can see the damage. And it's on a piece of wood in the back that's not sealed, so all your mold can jump.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So this is, as much as I love Abraham Lincoln, and I really do, that's kind of a miserable piece that can really destroy a lot of our stuff.
We have a couple more pictures over here. Which one would you like to do next?
So this one is, as far as we know, we don't know who this is, but it's somewhere along the line we got the feeling one of the other pictures, it's the same, and it's Walter Reed of the Walter Reed Hospital.
Just looking at it, I would say, it's World War I, so it'll be like Black Jack Pershing type of age-wise.
Yeah, but no identification, but a lot of mold. And again, not sealed in the back.
Not sealed
it
in
can
the back.
jump.
You
Yep.
can see on the front again, we can also see the water damage around the edges.
Yep.
And some things that do look like mold on there, too.
Oh, yeah. As you were saying that, I thought I saw, no, it's just as peeling off in the back. I thought I saw like a plaque or something. We're constantly looking at things but we'll be putting these outside, and if somebody wants to come and take them, we're going to be open on the 11th of July, which is our next meeting, and I'll be here at 4 o'clock. We're going to ask people to sign an agreement that they know that they've got damaged goods going, but if they want them, they can certainly take them. And then if not, they'll be destroyed.
We have a couple more over here.
This is a piece of linoleum. And on the other side is Thoughts of a Young Veteran. And it's just loaded. It's, if you touch it, it's greasy, and it's got all kinds of stuff in it. But nobody has any identification of how it got here, where it was, why we have it. But it is a detrimental piece.
It almost looks like there's another whole thing going on here with another contaminant, smoke.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it does look like that. You're right. It has some wonderful drawings in it, but at the same time, if you tried to clean this, there might be somebody who could conserve it, but I doubt it, and you'd be spending a lot of money, and I don't think it's... there's just nothing that identifies it as being with Whitman, and unfortunately when they're torn like this, I mean, look at it, just leaves you a really good chance for it to go somewhere. And it's clearly somebody's project that they taped it onto this piece of linoleum.
Okay, and we've got a couple more down here that we have some things to show.
This one is, we don't know who. But he's a mess.
Somebody's Uncle Abner or something, huh?
Yeah, I think that we don't know if it's Uncle Abner or we really, there's something down below. I know what it is. This is Walter Reed.
Oh, that's Walter Reed. Okay, so the other one may not. The other one may not
We
be.
looked up the Reeds here, and I mean, we certainly have a lot of Reeds in Old Abington, but it's not one from here.
Yeah.
And so he's providing us with enough damage.
Yeah, you can see a lot of that very plainly on that one.
Oh yeah. Well, that's the thing, is that these things are extremely plain.
And now here's one more that is a face that some people will recognize.
Yeah, that's Woodrow Wilson, and he may have come here somewhere along the line. I mean, you asked if he ever came, but so did a lot of people. I mean, Kennedy came here, but we're not keeping anything of his either. But it is, you see, as soon as you have the water stains, you're going to have the mildew. It's kind of like, I lived in an area that had a lot of flash floods in Kentucky. And once you get that, and then you got the mildew coming in right behind it. And so, and it's a newspaper. It's from a newspaper, and they put it together. So I tend to believe that you could probably go to the Globe archive and get it there. So that's, and then we also have people on the commission who, when they come here, they have to wear masks, as you'll see one of them out in the hall, because we're trying to make it so that we don't have any mold and mildew in here. So these are the worst ones that we've identified are all here. And that's it. And then you can also see what we have here as far as some of the information. Those are old street books and town reports. We have a box of postcards, and then we have boxes that are from the old surveys that have information about houses. And the other thing
was this photo here one of the ones that you wanted to show some of the damage on?
Yeah. This one, I don't know how well you can see it, but you can see the mold, the spots that are in that picture.
See if you get it nice and tight on that. If I were wearing my glasses, I might have been able to see some of that stuff, but
No, it's definitely there. I don't know, how long ago. We don't know who she is. We have no idea who she is. So, people have we cleared the phone, and there was a woman who had picked up a cigar box that she wanted to give us, and I sent her to John. I said that's the type of thing that John would want to do. And we could probably look up if you needed some information about the cigar box, but if you want to give it to somebody, give it to the society. The Dyer Library also accepts things, because they're a Society of Old Abington, and they have a separate commission as well. Rockland does not have a museum, but they have the GAR Hall. So a lot of things go to the GAR Hall there, and they have a very strong unit there, and we work closely with them.
As a matter of fact, one of the old, from a couple of years ago, the conversations that were being done in the Dyer Library by the Historical Society of Old Abington, we went out and did an actual walkthrough of the GAR building.
Because didn't you film the GAR book? Yeah.
Yep.
So that was one of the things that I think that's a very interesting point that happened within the last 2 years with the commissions working together, is that 15, 20 years ago, all three books, for your public, in case they don't know, the GAR was the Grand Army of the Republic, and it was the group of men as they came back from the Civil War. The women raised the money to build the halls, and it was a place for them to meet and see each other and have different events and talk about the Civil War, etc. So all three areas of Abington, and it hadn't split yet, had their own GAR hall. So the one here burned. The one in Abington is now a Buddhist temple, and the one in Rockland is still standing as a GAR hall. And all of them, when they came back, here's where history separates itself. So when the men came back, everybody says, well, they stood right next to the book and they wrote their story. They didn't. What they did is they came back and they told their story, and they had to have, my best friend went with me. He was in the war with me. And when you you look at the book, it's all in the same handwriting. So it's somebody who had beautiful handwriting in the town, and they transcribe it. And I did history research on my own house, which was built in 1839. And I went up because he had been to the GAR Hall, and Dean Sargent was alive then, and he had the book, and that's where I'd first seen the book. So as I got involved here, we realized Abington's was in the Dyer, Whitman was downstairs in the lobby, but Rockland's was missing. But I had seen Rockland's because my house was in Rockland. So I knew it existed. So I worked with Pam Ryan, who has done a huge amount of work at the GAR Hall. I mean, she's phenomenal at it. And she found the book. I said, it has to be here. And I contacted Carol Mooney, who had been on the Historic Commission with me before, and she now lives in Dorchester. And she said the last place she saw it. So Pam found it. So we now have all 3 books. And that gives us tremendous amount of work from that. And then we were also missing the oldest records of Old Abington. And I had worked with Martha Campbell, who I originally started doing historic research with. She had cataracts, and I used to drive her to Plymouth. And she's probably the most well-known historian in the area. So she took me to where they had the oldest records, and they were just gone. So we found those. And then the last thing we were looking for was the Sanborn maps. And the Sanborn maps are really important insurance maps, because if you had a brick end to your house, or you lived anywhere near a factory, and let's face it, all of Old Abington had some factory near pretty much every place. So a lot of these houses, they'll show, like with my house, it showed the original cape, and then it showed how it telescoped back and how it went back one and where a shed was. And we were able to use those in the surveys. And they use them a lot in the surveys. And you can get those off the internet now. You don't have to go to a commission. But when I first saw them, Marcia Fader and I went up to Beacon Hill, because they were stored at the archives in Beacon Hill. They're now at the archives out at UMass Boston. And so those give you an idea of when your additions were built on your house and things like that. So those are very helpful. But those books are fantastic. And I know that they've transcribed all the ones in Abington. They're working on the ones in Rockland, and we're working on the ones in Whitman. But right now we're trying to that's one of the things we're doing now, is because we've got all kinds of GAR information in here, and the sons of the GAR, which are the sons of the men who came back from the Civil War.
Because it was interesting when we first started talking about the GAR, and they said, well, we know where this book is and we know where that book is, but this other one is absolutely missing. We have no idea. We think it might have burned in a fire or something.
Yep.
And it was just wonderful when it was rediscovered.
Right.
Because they sent the one out, was it Rockland or Whitman? I'm trying to remember now. They sent it out and actually had it restored.
Whitman was restored. Rockland's is being restored now. And it was Rockland's that was missing. Abington's, you filmed Abington's. But I think it was because I remembered it, and we had redone our house, and we found Civil War diaries in the house, and somehow or another, it's a long involved story, I ended up on HGTV, and so I knew, and HGTV keeps pushing you, get more information. So I said, well, I have an awful lot of information here. And they said, well, we would like you to get more. So that's when I contacted Dean, and because I knew that Lemuel Jenkins, who had built my house, had gone off to, he was what they call a 90-day warrior, where he was in Cincinnati. He was protecting a Lincoln asked for men who were non-traditional age to guard the prisoners of war, so that the younger men would be more able. When you look at all the things that Lincoln did, it's just remarkable. But he had made this request, and sure enough, all the older men went and guarded the people who were in the prisoner of war camps.
And the Jenkins name is a well-known name around this area, too. There were lots of those folks here.
But we can't find a picture. If anybody has a picture of Lemuel Jenkins, we keep looking. Pam has actually done such a good job. I think she's only missing maybe 2 people from the GAR, and he was one. Yeah, and I'm like, how could that be? But it is, yeah.
Okay, that takes care of this little hole. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to go out and talk to the folks that are working out in the hall and see if they will tell us what brought them to the Historic Commission. here's one of the newest members of the Historic Commission, and your name is?
Sean Simmons.
Sean, what brought you to the Historic Commission?
Well, when I moved to the town, I figured, it might be interesting to learn the history of my town, and there was actually something that I could join, because I used to live in Boston, where there wasn't something I could join like this. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to do it.
And there's an awful lot of history here. There's plenty of history in Boston for you, but there's also quite a lot around here, too.
Yeah. And, seeing the Historical Commission, it's history that you can actually, take part in and, help organize like we're doing today.
Thank you so much. Okay, we have a couple of other folks over here with familiar faces. I'm going to go behind you, Michael. Michael Ganshirt, who may not get up and talk to us today. People he's involved, he's the assistant town clerk. He's on the library board of trustees. He's also president of the Dollars for Scholars that raises the scholarship money for the high school students every year and does a wonderful job of that. And is there anything else, Michael, just that you can... That's it. That's it? Is that all? I thought there were probably many more. We also have here Lorna Holbrook, who many of you folks may have seen because she's a friend of the library, and she is always at the roller skating fundraisers at Carousel. And what brought you on to the Historic Commission, Lorna?
Well, I'm very interested in the history of Whitman. I'm actually a fourth-generation Whitmanite, so I'm a townie that goes way back. Before that, it was when Whitman was part of Abington. But that's basically it. I've just grown up in Whitman all my life, and I'd like to help other people understand part of the history that I know that's now history. I feel like an old person.
Well, I know that from just my wanderings around down here in the South Shore that the Holbrook name is a very common name around this area.
Yes, it is, yeah. Our family, well, they named Holbrook, of course, after, well, it's not a direct line, my great-great-great-uncle or something like that. And basically, the Holbrooks came into Weymouth, and then they migrated down to Abington, and now it's Whitman.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else who'd like to tell me? Okay. Let's go over here, and I got to get around you this way. Otherwise, I'd have to be sitting in Lorna's lap, and I don't think she'd like that. And your name is?
Elaine Bergeron.
And Elaine, what brought you to the Historic Commission?
I'm a third-generation Whitmanite, and I'm a member of the Historical Commission and the Planning Board and also the Community Preservation. And the reason I wanted to be involved is I want the history to be preserved here in town, and it's very interesting. I mean, I know what I know from being here for as long as I've been here, and some of what, of course, my parents and grandparents would have told me. But I learn a lot every time we do something like this. My grandmother came here from Ireland in 1907, which is when this building was completed. So a lot of connections.
Okay, now let's just walk over this way and see if we can get this gentleman to talk to me for a minute.
Well, I'm Mike Simmons. I'm a relatively new resident of the town of Whitman, originally from the city of Boston, Dorchester. And I came, I wanted to be involved in the town, and I thought being involved in history, along with my son, who's a history major, something we could do together and help the town.
And you came up here on a nasty, rainy Saturday morning to go pouring through pieces of paper.
That's correct. That's correct. It's part of being part of the group and helping out.
Yeah. Well, most of history detecting is going through old papers, right?
True.
Okay, and then we've got Michael, and we'll just let him go by because he's on television enough, almost as much as I am. So we just want to say thank you for watching. Now, if you've watched this, you have a better understanding of how the history gets preserved in towns like this. It's not just because people get interested in it, it's because there are actual boards that preserve it and keep it and make sure it stays around. Well, that's all from Whitman Town Hall for today. We'll see you on another program another time.